I'll do a quick introduction of myself and why I'm here. And my life has come full circle from where it started. I was born in a family where parents had drama that had happened in their lives that was unresolved. So they didn't recognize it, and back then, I was born in 1960, so back then that wasn't even something that we acknowledged. We didn't talk about back then. But it affected their parenting, it affected how things happened to them. So as life happened to them, and they didn't know how to deal with that and put that into context, then life happened to me. And at one point, I would have described myself as a victim of child abuse, neglect, and molestation. At this point, I've come far enough in my own recovery to be able to say I'm a survivor of. And I think that's a huge thing that we miss sometimes when we talk about being a victim, because it's true that we are victimized by what happens around us, and we can feel that with everything that we have. But some people get locked into this mindset and they don't recover. And so they stay with a victim mentality. And so a recovery happens in stages, and it happens over the course of a lifespan. And I'm on the other side of it now. So coming from that for myself, then as an adult, my husband and I got into foster care. He grew up next to a foster family. I didn't have a foster family. I was one of those kids in the 60s where back then it's their kids, it's their family, it's their business, you don't say anything, you don't put your nose in, that needed to have a foster family, needed somebody to be my voice that I didn't have. So I had an interest in those kids who didn't have anybody to speak for them. And I got in it for that reason, just to provide a safe place where they could kind of catch their breath. And we did go through training to become foster parents, but I can tell you, even after 36 hours at that point in time with the state, I was ill-equipped to be a foster parent. Because we believed we will provide a stable place, a nurturing place, we will show them unconditional love, and everything's going to be okay. And we got a reality check very early on. And once we adopted 9 children from the foster system, our reality check lives on in a daily basis. So we have learned about long-term the effects that continue for our kiddos throughout their life, and they're going to have their own recovery journey. We're going to play a role in that. We're going to help them along, and with the right tools, we can help approach them from a positive standpoint instead of from a standpoint that's traditional, where we expect that if we do A, B, and C, they're going to do D and E, and everybody's going to be happy. But they will, they're like, all of our lives are like onions. They're like layers. You deal with something, you think, okay, I'm through that. Then something happens in your life and goes, oh shit, I'm not far as long as I thought I was. So then you pull off the next layer and you just keep going. And their lives are going to be the same way, from being a child on into adulthood. So I'll be sharing my life experiences, the experiences of my kids as we go. We're going to go ahead and dig in today. Our training are funded by this group of people. And this is kind of our game plan. Now, we may go early in some spots, we may go late in some spots. We don't want, this is just a guide for us. If we get caught in a discussion and we carry over, This is kind of what we're looking at. So, reading through this, I'm not going to read it to you now, but what we're really looking for is for us to be able to get outside the box and adjust our expectations of our interactions with children so that we can help them to recover. The reason that we're here today, and we kind of talked about it earlier, is to make sure that we're giving people the tools that they need to be able to be successful in bridging a gap in recovery. So we want to approach from a positive standpoint, and we're going to be talking about some challenging things today. There are going to be things today that we're going to talk about that's going to be harder than others. There's going to be things that you're probably going to go, this is more difficult. But we want to keep everything in mind for how we can take something that's difficult and reframe it to something that we can use to go forward in the future. Okay. First big piece that we're going to jump into is risks of the caregiver. When I talked about my parents and I talked about their unresolved issues, there were some things that happened in their life that they brought with them to their parenting experience that they were unaware of. And even in the instance where they might have had an opportunity to address it or have counseling, what happens to us in our past becomes part of our experiences. It's part of us. It's woven into our fabric. So it's not that we want to deny that it happened. It's not that we want to get hung up there, but we need to acknowledge that it happened and how it affects us. So in the case of my mom, she lost her mother when she was 4 years old. And then from there, her father had 4 girls from 4 different moms. So when my mom's mom died, he sent all the girls out to aunts to be raised. And they stayed there. So they lost their mom. They went to aunts. Yes, they're relatives, but they're different. You can be related, and you're still going to experience separation loss. You're still going to experience those things that go in with that. So they went to the aunt's house, and then when he would find or marry someone new, he would bring all the kids back home because now we're going to be a big happy family. And when the new wife was overwhelmed with 4 girls who had trauma from losing their moms, and she was like, I don't know how to handle this, because back then, there wasn't much help for people in the early 30s, 40s to be able to deal with this. Then all the kids got farmed out again. So as she became a mother, she still hadn't been able to deal with her feelings of being neglected and being invisible in life to be able to help parent me. That's how one of those situations played out in our family. Anybody know someone where you've seen this play out with them as an adult?
Do you want me to share?
Sure.
Oh, my grandma, my dad's mom, she was in a similar situation in the early 30s. Her mom was an alcoholic, and her dad abandoned them after my grandma was born. And my grandma and her older brother got sent to an orphanage, and right when they were supposed to get back to their mom's care, she was actually killed in a drunk driving accident. So then they were sent to the orphanage, and then she carried that on into raising my dad. She was a single mother of 6 kids, and in an abusive relationship. So she fled states, moved across the country, raised 6 kids on her own, and then, that had traumatic. My dad was the youngest of 6, and she was never around, so then that kind of affected my father and his parenting style with me and my siblings. So it's like the same thing.
It repeats itself. Mm-hmm. Maybe not to the same degree.
Yeah.
And it looks different, but it goes with us. Mm-hmm. Our perspective goes with us. Go ahead.
Well, just reflecting on how far back this goes in people's lives. My mother was, her father was an alcoholic, and so she suffered a lot of abuse, and her 6 brothers were during the war, and she lost one, and it was really just a horrific time. And so then fast forward, and I'm one of 8, and one of my brothers was an alcoholic, and just how that plays a part in not knowing what to do, as far as dealing with that because of her unresolved things. So I just, was thinking about how far back this goes in people's lives. It doesn't just happen.
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, my mom left them as children and moved here. They lived in Kentucky, and so her father married another woman and she abused them tremendously. And then she met my dad, whose mother died at birth, And so he didn't have that. I mean, I don't know what he had, but he had sisters who raised him. And so, after thinking about it later on, my mom was so used to the abuse. She married a man who was abusive, and that was how we were raised, abuse and all that going on. And, you know, and it trickles down to my kids, and, you know, it's just like, trying to break the cycle. That's one of the reasons why I'm here for this.
Great. And you're right. I think in my life, the thing that I didn't realize is when you are a victim, and we talked about the difference between being victimized and having a victim mentality. When you have a victim mentality, you have a radar that you're sending out that you're not aware of. And it's exactly what you said. Abuse me, I'm not worth it, I'm not valuable, I'm invisible. And so we attract people who will treat us like we're advertising to be treated. Then we repeat the situation. You see this a lot with younger women who come to you and say, I keep dating all these jerks, how come all these people? And you're like, honey, that's what you're advertising for. So until we look at what happened to us and adjust our radar, that's what we're going to end up with. Chronic and undetected medical issues are also risks for caregivers because if we are not feeling our best, if we're in constant pain, it's going to produce chemicals in our body that are going to have a reaction with us, and psychologically we're not going to be at our best to be able to deal with everything that comes up with our kiddos. And it's not that we're mistreating them or neglecting them or abandoning them, but we're just not, our focus is going to be on what's happening internally with us versus what's happening outside. Domestic violence is going to affect people's ability to parent. If they are used to being mistreated or they've seen it mistreated, they're going to have knee-jerk reactions to certain things that will happen, tones of voice, doors slamming, and that's going to come across to our kids. Instances of substance abuse or alcohol use, and this for us, as we're talking about caregivers, can be either our parents use substance or alcohol, or we ourselves in the parent-caregiver role have used substance or alcohol, and how that's going to affect our kids. Substance effect and alcohol use, and this last one on this slide, foster care or adoption, go together under the word of trauma. And it affects our kids differently. And it's hard to tell if you get a child whose parent used substances or alcohol, they were exposed to it prenatally, and then they had a life of trauma after that, not knowing where they were going to stay, not knowing where the next meal was going to come from, moms in and out of jobs, that kind of thing, and they end up in foster care. Then we have the trauma on top of it. It affects the child's behavior, and it affects the pathways of their brain. So when they're engaged in a certain behavior, it's going to look the same, but the difference is that if we take what we call I don't use the word normal because I don't really like the word normal, and if we take what we call a typical child, a child who is developing along the developmental milestones that doctors are expecting to see, and they have an instance of trauma, and we put in place the right interventions for them and healing for them, we can see them begin to make strides to recovery. Will they ever get back to where they were before the trauma? Probably not. We're not going to reset the whole button, but we are going to be able to take them further from where they were. If we've had a child who's been exposed prenatally to substance or alcohol, we're not starting off with a typical child. We're starting off with a child whose brain has been changed. Their neurodevelopmental system has been changed. So even though we're going to see the same behavior from them, we're not going to see the same results with our interventions. So we want to keep that kind of in mind as we go. Some similarities and some differences. For those of us who have been around, I'm sorry.
Yeah, one thing I just wanted to comment on, it's indirectly hinted at it and we've touched on it, but the medical issues are both physical and mental health issues.
Yes.
So, I think I was in a situation where my fiance, his mom was had just a lot of mental health issues growing up, and that really affected his upbringing. So again, I think we kind of hinted at it, but it's both the physical and the mental side.
Yeah, and I appreciate you bringing that up, because that's absolutely true. Okay, other things that adults bring in as risk factors: homelessness. If we ourselves never knew where things were coming from, our view of reality and stability is going to be different. If we're the caregiver who is moving from place to place for our kids, that's going to affect their sense of stability and their sense of belonging. If we've been gone for a long time and gone on a vacation, bless you, we really enjoy when we're gone, but when we get home, it's like, it's good to be home. Because there's that feeling that this is my place. This is where I come in, this is where I put my stuff down, this is where I relax, this is where I recover. And when that's absent in our life, it impacts us, it affects us. The difference between homelessness when I was growing up and homelessness now is that we have a whole generation of people that don't consider themselves homeless.
Right.
Right? Because as long as they've got 25 friends and they're staying on 25 different couches or in their car, they're not homeless. But for us, when we were growing up, if we didn't have that address with the same bed in the same bedroom every night, then we would consider that to be homeless. So when we're working with kids, and we may look at them or other adults, as you're working with adults that are in your life in recovery, and they're talking in terms of moving around, and you're in your head thinking they're homeless, they may not see or identify themselves as being homeless. Poverty, when you don't have anything, when you never know where you're going to stay, you don't have the right clothes, you don't have medical care, you don't have the things that money affords us, it's going to affect what we bring into our parenting experiences. Trauma can be, trauma is defined by the person who's experiencing it. I think sometimes when we think trauma, we think 9/11. We think of our kids who were used to when we were growing up, when our kids were growing up, used to call everybody into the gym. We would watch the shuttles and the spaceships launch, and it was just part of growing up. It was a rite of passage until what happened? All the kids are in the gym, spaceship goes up, boom, it's busted into a trillion pieces, and all of a sudden the school system goes, oops, we can't do this anymore because our kids have seen that. So sometimes we think of that trauma as being big, but trauma for a child can, and for us, can be as much as losing something that was valuable to us. It can be having that pet that we are firmly attached to, that when we're upset, when something has happened, that we're sitting next to them, we're petting them, they're always in our room at night when we're sleeping, and then all of a sudden they're hit by a car. That can affect our psyche. It can affect us. Poor nutrition is going to play a role in us, because if our body's not getting what it's needing, we're not going to be at our best. Our genetics is something that we can do nothing about. It comes to us. We're going to have tendencies for certain things that are going to be more likely that might happen to us, and or less likely that might happen to us. But it comes to play in making us who we are. And if we have a lack of support, would you agree with me that most people find it important to be involved in meaningful relationships? Right? And we can define those relationships. Sometimes that's marriage, sometimes that's partners, sometimes that's being single, but having a group of friends that are our friends that we are connecting with and we feel supported by. Something happens in our life, or we could pick up the phone or send a text and that they're there. When we don't have that, it can lead to isolation. And when people feel isolated, then it's harder for them to heal from whatever's happening in their life. And it's harder for people to speak into their life. If we're on a slippery slope of making a risky decision that they see someone around us who knows us and sees us start to make and cycle back, they know well enough to be able to speak into our lives and say, hey, I've noticed. I've seen this change. This concerns me. When we don't have the support systems built around us, we've got our head, right? And in our head, we're always making the right choice, right? We're always thinking, I evaluated my options, I'm making the best choice that's available to me, and so that affects us.
I've got a comment around that.
Sure.
I think a lot of folks that parent may not have a good support system. People in recovery, specifically from addiction, many times go to meetings every day, and it's almost like sometimes it seems like their need for support is so great that they can't do very good, they don't have time to parent. And so, we say in recovery is a selfish program, and it is, and at the same time, I see a lot of people in recovery that focus on their own recovery so much that they really can't do a very good job parenting or whatever. And so for me, it's lacking support could be, but also having support that keeps you from, because if it's almost like you're still going out and getting high. Instead of getting high though, you're going to get support.
You got addicted to meetings.
Yeah, so I don't know if that makes sense to anybody
Oh,
else.
It certainly does.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. And because one thing that happens many times for our parents who are in recovery is they've kind of burned some bridges with their support systems. And so that's a challenge for them to be able to reconnect. And Stan, I really appreciate what you said, because there's that balance. There's that balance that says, if I don't focus on what I need right now, I'm not going to be able to heal to give you what you need. And then the opposite, that either doesn't take it and still continues to cycle, or doesn't implement the support that they have to move forward. So it becomes an individual situation that's going on there. That was excellent input for us. Okay, so now we have the same risk factors for our kiddos that come into care. And if you don't have children, if you can think of a friend who has children, get to see some things that are in their life. Maybe you're an adult who never had a cause for recovery. Maybe your life was solid, your family was solid, you never had an experience with abuse or neglect, you were never homeless, you never experienced poverty, you had great medical care, you never had any health concerns. Let's just say that you are that imaginary person that we all think exists out there somewhere, right? Sure. So, but then you come in contact with this child, and the child brings the risk factors to the relationship. When we have kiddos who have been abused or neglected, their trust is broken. It's gone. And they're hardwired, and moms get a lot of attention in these types of conversations, and some of it's fair and some of it's just logistical, because from the time that baby is conceived, that baby is hardwired to that mom. Not all moms, that mom. That mom's tone of voice, that mom's smell, that mom's beating of the heartbeat, the way that mom processes food. I mean, those two are one. So when that is broken, even if it's no fault of her own, I mean, if she has a C-section and something goes wrong and the baby's raised by somebody else for a while until she gets her feet back together, the baby's born with some kind of unexpected medical condition and goes to NICU for a while and the mom's not able to bond with the baby, even in those instances that happen in the general public, that baby's suddenly, where is my mom? And it changes how they perceive the world around them. So once something happens where somebody that they're in a relationship with is suddenly gone or abuses or neglects them, it changes their view of the world. And they then become responsible for making sure they keep themselves safe. They're going to do everything they possibly can to keep themselves safe, even though it's impossible. You know, an 18-month-old cannot provide the income, but an 18-month-old is darn well going to act like, I'm in charge of me, I'm in charge of this house, I'm going to get my snacks, and I'm going to tell you how life is going to go, because they can't trust that the adult is going to do that for them. Okay? So when you come in contact with some of these kids, sometimes you look at it and you're like, man, that girl's a little bossy. Sometimes you need to step back and think, why is she bossy? What's driving that behavior? Instead of stopping there. We talked, I just in passing here, chronic or undetected medical issues. When our kiddos are born with some type of a complication, they're not able to view the world around them accurately. You may be doing everything right. You may be bonding with them. You may be holding them. You may be taking care of them. Every time they cry and they need fed and they need their diaper changed, you may be right there. That if there's something that's creating pain for them in their life, they're not able to sense what's really going on. They're not seeing it. They're not getting the full benefit of your reliability. When kids see domestic violence, they feel like it's their fault. Because they can't make it stop. They see somebody that they care about being hurt, and they can't stop it. And they blame themselves. We know as adults, that's not rational. We don't expect a 4-year-old child to stop a grown woman or a grown man from acting out. But they think that they should be able to stop it. And so that comes into play in their lives. Children have been exposed to alcohol or substances. We talked earlier, their brains are actually changed. From the time that the baby is growing in the womb, their central nervous system is growing. So whatever is growing at the point of exposure is affected. And the brain is one of the first things that starts to grow, and it continues to the end. Now, our brains are still, they say, changing and placid until the age of about 25. So we can still have some change and some growth in them. Beyond that, they say we're pretty much.
Yeah, in terms of the exposure,
Sure.
what's I'm familiar more with maternal exposure, but what if the father got high, used drugs, conceived when the sperm was under the influence or whatever? Is there any, how does that, do we have any research on that?
Yes, we have research on that, but it's regard to animals. It's not regard to with human, with male sperm. But we know from studies that are done with mice and with other things, when the male is using drugs or drinking, the actual sperm is changed. So as the sperm is changed, then as the sperm unites with the egg, it's going to have its effect. They've been able, with fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, to be able to say that when the mom, who was not exposed, but the dad, who was, changed his sperm, we see fetal alcohol effects with the kids. But that study's only been done with mice because there's ethics about
What type of effects?
generally when it's coming from the dad's side versus the mom's side, it's more indirect. So at that point, we're looking at attention spans, comprehensions, ability to problem solve some of those issues that we probably aren't going to associate with male exposure to alcohol. And we're not going to see as much until those kiddos are a little bit older and they start to be in school age. Prior to school age, we make a lot of justifications for kids. We're like, well, they're still developing, well, they're this, well, they're that, well, they're, and we don't really say, you know what, this child looks like it might have been exposed to alcohol, or exposed to crack, or exposed to cocaine, unless we're seeing some severe symptoms in context with stuff.
Now, what about caffeine on the maternal or paternal? How does that affect that?
Stan, I don't know about dads when it comes to caffeine. I know as far as doctors are concerned, but more, I'm sorry, can you answer that for me?
No, not about the caffeine. I was just going to say about the alcohol exposure. My boys have a stepsister, and when her mother was pregnant, she was about 7 months pregnant and decided that she was going to drink and take pills. And you can see the difference in Dallas compared to, like, because my children, I didn't use with any of them. And then she didn't use with her first 3. And you can see the difference in her. Like, she will be 7 years old, and I think she's about this big. Very little, don't really talk very much, has trouble at school. And, like, you can just tell she's just a little off from the other kids. She clings to her dad, like no other. She'll talk to him, but like when you see her, she just smiles and goes, and you can just see the difference in her, and then the way that her growth is. Like, she weighs 32 pounds, almost 7 years old. Like, she is extremely tiny for her age, and the other girls are real tall and lanky. But you can see the difference in it, and it's crazy how much that changes. But it was amazed when we found out she was getting drunk, and she wasn't just drinking a little bit, she was drinking fists and knocked out between them. So
I think it's interesting that there's not been more of a study done regarding the male and the results.
And I think that's because they associate baby
Because the
inside
mother-
mom
that's-
sharing the
yeah.
stuff, so they look at the mom versus the dad.
Well, I'm just thinking in terms of like our situation with my son. We were given birth history for him because we adopted him a little later than our daughter, and so we knew that the father was an alcoholic. So we knew that he was predisposed. I never, and then the mother, because I just never thought that she probably, engaged or indulged. But then, as years gone on, I remember when we went to the hospital to pick him up, they said, the nurse said, well, I want you to know that mom came, she left the hospital, came back, and we smelled alcohol and nicotine cigarettes. And so, so fast forward and years later, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, he had a double whammy, and then how does that affect everything? And he's also, he knows that. He did not hide that from him, that he was predisposed. But just that whole hardwiring and how that all is affected just is.
I think what you said, and I'm going to get back to Stan's question about the caffeine, but when we talk about the substance and the alcohol, we have the physical effects of the brain that challenge the child to carry with them. But as they become, as they're born and they're experiencing daily life and the challenges they have, this also becomes a risk for them because life is not just the same. They don't live life like some of the other kids do, what they consider normal kids. But then also, they experience a sense of shame too. Because somewhere along the line, as they start to put the pieces together, they ask themselves, why did she do this? Wasn't I worth it? Didn't she know this was going to hurt me? And they think they've done something wrong, or that they weren't worthy of her taking care of herself and getting the proper nutrition and so forth. And so they take the blame. So they get the physical dimensions and the emotional, and then the mental, because of what a struggle it is for them in school. And Stan, I don't know the effects of the brain with the caffeine in the developing moms. I know that the OBGYNs are hard and fast about no chocolate, no coffee, no this, no that.
Chocolate?
Yeah, because it's got caffeine in it. So they're like warning away from all of that. But to be able to stand here and tell you that if you did this, this was what's going to happen, I can't do, but I'd be more than happy to check on that for you, because now I'm curious.
Yes, I just a couple things. Although they're not results, but 23 years ago, the doctor told me to drink anything except alcohol. Of course, that meant with caffeine, but I was pregnant with twins. I just thought of that when you said that. But and I wanted to add to some of the questions that my grandson has asked me. First, I've been straight up and honest with him. Most difficult thing I've done, but the questions that he's asked me was, do you think that mommy meant for it to happen this way? Because they do, they blame themselves. Well, what's wrong with me? Why didn't she love me? Da, 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 da. See, and they've also lost their dad. He's incarcerated. So both of those kids have a double whammy, and I'll leave that part at that. But I mean, just some of the questions that he asked, all, when I sit back and look at it, it comes to, it's like he's doing a mental inventory.
Right.
You know, and saying, what's wrong with me? And that's when I have to reassure him, no, baby, you know, she loved you very much, da 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 da. She's sick, she has a disease, she can't help it. You know, and just go on with it. But yeah, man, we messed them up pretty bad.
Kimberly said something that I'm thinking about you. Kimberly said something that is really important. The decision that we had to make as we were foster parents and then as adoptive parents, one thing, we made lots of mistakes along the way, I'll tell you. But one mistake that we didn't make is we always supported the birth mom.
Yes.
We always supported the birth mom. And so when our kiddos would have questions or something, and when we talked about, we never talked bad about the birth mom, we never talked bad about struggles. We always told those kids, your mom loves you. You are the most important thing in the world to her. And it was hard for them to believe because they were in foster care, where the rights were getting terminated, or she was in jail, or she was in treatment. But we explained that in the context of, she loves you very much. Right now, she's struggling.
Yeah.
Something has derailed her from being able to be the kind of parent with you that she wants to be. And whether we believed it about her or not at the time, because as we're human, sometimes it was a challenge for us to actually believe that that may be 100% true. But we always talk to our kids that way, because we are talking about that other half of them, the person who created them, that person that they were bonded with. And when we talk bad about a birth parent, we're talking bad about them.
That's right.
And we're adding to the shame that they feel. So we never want to, too many times in general populations where they don't understand the nature of foster care and adoption, you hear, and this is what we're not going to do here, the shame-free zone, you hear people say, well, if that were my kid, I'd be done right now. Why would you relapse? Don't you want your kids back? And they make that judgment that you're not doing the right thing. Shame on you. If it were me, I wouldn't be struggling with this right now. And we pass that along, or we say it on the telephone in hearing distance of these kiddos. And we plant in these kiddos' minds what? What do we do?
They're bad.
They're bad.
Something's wrong with them.
Something's wrong with me. I'm unlovable. I'm not worth it. If I were worth it, she'd quit smoking.
Yep.
So we never. I mean, that is a cardinal rule. Wrap your mind around it. And when you're a Republican and you hear people, you don't have to teach them, but if you just kind of speak back to them in terms of, you know, I'm sure she's doing the best she can in the situation that she's in.
Let's just pray.
Then we're not engaging in a discussion with them of values, but we're modeling to them there's a better way to be able to have this discussion. And you were going to say something. Do you remember what it was?
Yes, I do. As an adoptive mom of two, what I came to grips with was the fact that I couldn't minimize the fact, no matter how much I speak lovingly of the birth mom, is that there was trauma. And that my kids were at birth taken from that person that was carrying them for 8-9 months. And I always told my children that I don't underestimate the effect of that, and that I think it leaves a hole in your heart. And I keep wanting to fill it, but I can't totally fill it.
Right.
That, you know, that they have to learn the tools to do that, which has been a struggle for both of them, actually. But the other thing, so that I guess what I was trying to say is, as much as I said, you know, loving things about the birth mothers or birth fathers, it doesn't minimize the fact that they were traumatized at birth.
Right.
And I want to, you know, you want to fix it, and you can't. So then, my son, I was just thinking in terms of, when you talk about the emotional piece, for children feeling like that they've done something wrong or whatever. But the other piece for him was, Mom, why can't I be like everybody else? You know, he said to me, why, you know, we in college, why can't I be like everybody else? And, you know, and then as a mom, how do you respond to that? And my response was, I don't know. You know, I wish I could fix it, but we were born with some issues and the issue of addiction. So
We're talking this afternoon about, you know, interventions, but I want to say here that one of the things that we want to do with our kiddos is acknowledge their differences, because they're real and they see it and they know it. So we don't want to ever minimize and act like, oh, it's not a big deal. Oh, what, you know, we want to acknowledge, yeah, reading for you is a real struggle. When you read, you can read the words fine, but if we ask you what's the next thing or what happened or what the point was, it's hard for you to bring that forward and talk about how everybody's brain works differently. So what can we do to help you with your brain to be able to function the best? And everybody's got a challenge. You see your challenge, but you don't know that Johnny's challenge is da-da-da. So we validate their concern, and it doesn't take them long to realize they are different. And our job is to help them learn and be at peace with the idea that they're different and not wish it away, because it's not going away, or not minimize that fact. Let's see. They've got chronic bleeding. I hit this, but it's similar. They've seen domestic violence. Yeah, this slide looks like it's pretty much a lot of the other one. So in your slides now is a blank one, and it says risk factors on it. So this is a point where we just want to stop for a minute, and I want you to think about your own experiences in life and challenges, what risks that you bring into building a relationship with a child, whether it's your own child or children that you meet or children you be exposed to. And then if you have a particular child in mind, you can throw in some of the risks that they're bringing to what your interaction together might be like. And this is going to be personal. This is for you guys. We're not going to put these up here. We may talk about sharing it a little bit. But
So these are risk factors for developing relationships?
Yes, sir. The way that we help neutralize our risk factors, or at least put into play to help us with our risk factors, is protective factors. When we surround ourselves with our protective factors, we can kind of balance that somewhat. So when we are intentional about a support system, that's going to reduce our risk factors. And a support system can be anything from intimate relationships to knowledge, agencies that provide services, whatever, that when we're in a situation where we feel like that we have a need, we reach out to, and we know that there's somebody solid, something solid that we can go to. If we have adequate income, It is really hard to be a good problem solver if we're always wondering whether we're gonna be able, this month we're going to pay our rent on time, but we're not gonna pay our car payment. And the next month we catch up with the car payment, and then the rent goes late. If we're always in that situation where we're stretched, it's real hard to be a really good problem solver, and we're vulnerable. So making sure that we have adequate income, and that doesn't mean, you know, you have a working car and you really want a Mercedes. That's not the situation. Just enough that you can pay your bills, take care of your food needs, take care of the things that need to be done. Safe housing. Safe housing is different than housing. And so we want to make sure that when we're talking about protective factor for safe housing, that it really is safe. That we feel safe there, that our kids feel safe there, that we don't have harmful rodents or leaks, bad electricity, stuff that's going to cause problems as we're living there. Now, we're talking about ideal protective factors. I think we all realize that sometimes there's spots in people's lives where ideal protective factors don't exist. And sometimes the housing is what it is until we can get some stability and we move on. But the safe housing is the goal. We want to make sure that we have appropriate services in place for our mental health, our physical health, and our recovery services. Because as we have those in place and we're meeting those needs, it's going to increase our ability of being able to be successful. We're going to be better problem solvers. And you're going to hear me say problem solvers all day long. You're probably going to go, oh, no. But that's what we do. We solve problems. When things come to us, we're trying to formulate a way to address the situation and so they're ready to move forward. Adequate food is important for us and in our home. Employment. Being able to know that we're in charge of so much money coming in, and this is where it goes to, is critical as comparison to having to rely on others to bring that money to us. It's great when your employment is meaningful. I appreciate your story. From 1999, I think it was, or 1996, you've been doing what you want and you love it. And that makes a world of difference in your whole world. When you feel good about how you're spending your time, you feel like it's purposeful, you feel like it amounts to something. Some people, like when my dad, he worked for General Motors in a factory. His job was loading rods of steel into a machine that punched out little parts. He didn't have much affection for that job, nor did he feel like that it was very important. And I think for him, that was an issue. He almost felt shame or embarrassment about, I work in a factory. Yeah. So we all don't have that opportunity. Sometimes you got to do what you got to do. You plan for your future and you move on. But in an employment situation where at least we can feel good about going every day and moving on.
You know, I just want to throw something in, and this may be, everyone else may know it except for me, but I'm doing some work with the community center, and I guess I'm sharing this because there's several people who are interested in being recovery coaches too. And the community centers here in town do some amazing work. You know, hooking people up with education opportunities like GED or high school equivalents, job training, budgeting and finance training, you know, preschool, daycare, sliding scale. And so I just want to put a plug in for, if you know of community centers, you know, that's a resource I think we can be tapping in to help people, because I wasn't aware of all the good that they do and stuff like that. So like the Hawthorne Center or the Bonner Center or the Martin Luther King Center, just keep those in mind, particularly for those recovery groups. Again, I probably was the only one that didn't know they were out there.
But that's a really good point, because that goes back to our support system. Yep. Sometimes we think of official support systems, and that's people or relationships we put in place. But sometimes it's indirect support systems that we've not thought of. They don't have a name, but when we need them, we know where to go, and they know where to send us to go to get what we need. So it all kind of pulls together. making sure that we are getting the right kind of training that we need to do what we need to do. When we're having an issue, when we're going to be embarking on something, getting those tools that we need. Purposeful living is tied to everything, but it stands alone on its own. How many times have we heard people, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with my life. I don't know where I'm supposed to use my energy. I don't know where I'm supposed to use my experience. I feel like I'm living every day, but it's not amounting to anything. When we're engaged in something where we feel like it's purposeful and it brings value back to us, it's a protective factor in our day-to-day life. When we're connected to somebody, it's okay to be single. Nobody says that you have to be in a married relationship or be living with somebody or going steady or whatever term we use. I think going steady was back when I was in the but as long as we're making a significant connection to somebody and we're not isolated, it's a protective factor for us. So that if we start to become run down, if we start to put things change in our medical history, that they can see us acting differently, responding differently, making risky choices, they can kind of say, hey, everything going okay? Somebody that we check in with. We talked about this earlier, self-acceptance and forgive yourself. These are two things. They're underneath the same bullet point, but there's two things. There's a difference between forgiving yourself and saying, I did the best that I could at the time, and you set yourself free. That's different than accepting yourself. Accepting yourself goes one deeper than that. One that says, I'm okay in my skin. I'm okay with me. Do I have things I want to work on? Yeah. Do I have things that I got a plan to resolve? Absolutely. But I'm okay with me. And you can forgive yourself without being comfortable with yourself. So although this is at the same bullet point, I just want to make sure that we will draw a distinction. And if we're not accepting of ourselves, that goes back to that radar thing. It's underlying and eroding everything that we do. And then when our boss comes to us with something very, very simple, like, hey, I saw that chart that you did, this isn't very clear to me, can you switch this around? And all they're doing is giving you an instruction. If you're not comfortable in your own skin, what did you just hear?
That you didn't do this right.
You didn't do a good job. You may be thinking I'm stupid, I'm this, I'm that. All those messages come reading in when we're not accepting of ourselves and knowing, hey, all he's saying is he'd just like to see the chart this way. That has nothing to do with my value as a person. He's talking about a chart. Okay? So take a second now. We won't take as long as we do with risk factors, but take a second now on your protective factors and think about the things in your life that you consider protective factors to keep you going in a positive track. So now we're going to hit the brain, the development. We're going to go through this. You have this in your slides. This is just for reference for you so you can kind of get a picture of when things start to develop within a child and what it is. And earlier today, heard a couple times, Deb said, I quit when I found out that I was pregnant. All right? So what we see repeatedly is whether somebody's smoking cigarettes, smoking weed, drinking, doing drugs, coming in later and saying, I quit when I found out I was pregnant. It's too late.
You're already 6 or 7 weeks along.
I felt so bad. The average is 6 to 8 weeks is when somebody finds out. And they stop, but there's still been the exposure. Now, is it great that they stopped it? Absolutely. I'm not saying, oh, well, throw it away because it doesn't really matter, make a thing about it. But I'm saying we need the reality that that child has been exposed so that we know what to look for in going forward. Okay. So this is a colorful picture, so just to show you the different sections of the brain, what that might look like. And I want to point out here, I wish I bet this little thing
I
has.
thought it was all gray. It's actually like rainbow
Now,
colored.
I come from the hippie generation, so of course mine's colorful and it has these little flowers and daisies growing out of it too. Okay, I want to point out to you that on this brain, the first thing that starts growing on a brain is this area right here called the brain stem. Okay? And then everything grows from that. The brain stem is the strongest part of our brain, and that's what's first developing. Okay, so when we'll talk about that later. There's not a very long brain stem there, but that is where the brain stem connects, and the brain stem, of course, later on connects to the spine and the nerve endings and all that stuff that runs down to the back. This is what a crosscut would look like, and the reason why that's important is because we're going to talk about some of those pieces that we can't see from the overall in the front. Okay, so when we look at the brain, this goes through which part of the brain does what. Okay, and it's really lengthy. I don't want to read it all to you, but I do want to go through because I think that's kind of why we're all here. Is that prefrontal cortex is where all our cognitive skills and our problem solving, our memory, our language, our judgment, and sexual behavior. This is our control center. Now, when we're going back with the brain stem is what develops first, and then it grows from there. And that's where the kid's processing does too. It starts with lower functions that require less of them, moves through the different sections of the brain until the complex thinking is up around the front of the brain. Okay? And that is our control center. And we're going to talk about how important this is as we go along. The temporal lobe does the auditory, receives sensory information from the ears and secondary areas, processes into meaningful units such as speech and words. So,
when it says and secondary areas, what are the secondary areas?
well, mister, I don't know.
I mean, is that like
I was thinking about trying to come up with an answer that sounded logical, and then I decided just to say, I would assume that it takes the information and it processes it on to the areas that it's dealing with, and that's what the term secondary means. But that is an assumption on my part, sir.
Okay.
Where this temporal lobe and the ears and the proper language is important is a lot of our kids have auditory processing disorders. It doesn't mean that they don't hear. When they have their hearing tests, their hearing comes back fine. They find no problems with it. But when you're speaking to them, they're picking up, processing about every third or fourth word.
I know a lot of adults in that.
So they're getting a broken message. Okay? And then once they get that broken message, then they have to figure out, what do I do with this message? Is it calling me to do something else with it? What do I do with the information that I got? And of course, this comes into play with our kiddos because our teachers are telling them, you know, Johnny, put your math book up, put your math book in your desk and get out your English paper. So he's trying to figure out, book, desk, what, okay. And then she's seen all the other kids do it, he's not doing it. Johnny, put your math book away and get your English paper out. So now he's got two messages stacked on top of each other, and he's not processed the first one. And his brain doesn't yet realize that it's the same exact message. To him, his brain is hearing two messages that are on top of each other. So then, since he's not done it, and she's not cued into what his challenges may be, she feels like he's not listening, or he's not complying, or I told him to put away his math book and get out his English paper, but he doesn't listen, he doesn't mind. And all he's trying to do is figure out what the heck she said.
So why do we need to know this about the brain?
Because once we need to know this about the brain so that we can properly interpret, is this an intentional act on this child's part to be non-compliant, or is it beyond their capability? Because there's a big, huge difference between can't and won't. And we address our kids and discipline our kids as if they won't do it when they may not have the capacity to do this. And when we're talking about effects of the brain, we're talking about the structure, the way the brain processes is actually changed. So it becomes important to understand.
So the next logical question is, how do we then determine whether it's a can't or a won't? Are there tests or diagnoses that we can do to determine whether there's a problem in the auditory and the temporal lobe to explain some of that? Or are we taking educated guesses based on risk factors and situations?
It's both.
Okay.
We do the hearing test, make sure that A, there is nothing wrong with the hearing.
Right, that's the hearing part. Can we do tests on the processing, or is that more?
And then we do functionality testing with them.
Okay.
So they go through a series of tests where they're, and there's hundreds of names for them depending on the school corporation, but they do the test to see what are they picking up and what can they do with that, and then they can determine from there. But that is pushing, Todd. What you're doing is not taking things at face value and saying, okay, what is the reason behind this? And we have to stop and do that with our kiddos to find out what the reason is, instead of going on the assumption that we know. And that takes activism. That takes us advocating for our kiddos, whether they're our kiddos or the ones that we're around, because if we don't advocate and say, wait, I notice this happening with him, could there be a reason why? Is there a test that we can use to determine that? If we don't take that step, it's not going to happen. Somebody else is not going to go, oh, you know what? I think they have an auditory processing problem.
Even when you take that step, it still sometimes don't happen.
Well, what I found as an educator is that some of our kiddos too, it doesn't happen until, it's not identified till later, as they get older, because you keep going, they're just not listening, blah, 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 so then they keep moving. And then it has that domino effect, which is then they're affected, educationally, cognitively, they're not learning, and then they become a discipline problem, and it just becomes a compounded thing. But it's very difficult. It's not as easy to identify that as people think. And there's not, and our system is not sophisticated and quick enough to even do this in a way that's timely. So kids end up falling between the cracks and moving along. And
our system is reactionary versus proactive, and so we have to prove that there's a gap. If we come in and we suspect something, if we're coming in at kindergarten or first grade, we're saying, I suspect something, we're going to get, hey, they're just learning how to go to school, they're just learning how to interface with their peers, they're just learning how to get to the lunchroom. Let's watch and see if something happens. This is somewhat normal. And then we get that until the point where there's this gap that everybody goes, oh my gosh, there's a gap.
And it's being diligent. I mean, speaking personally, my daughter has an auditory processing. And they kept saying something's not right with us. We had a test and blah, blah, blah. She did not get an IEP until she was almost junior high. Now, if I had not been diligent, she's now a college student, and then even as a teacher, like this past year I had a student, and I kept advocating, finally, before I retired, they were going to test him, because I said, there's an auditory processing thing going on here, but they don't, it's not clearly recognizable in our system.
This is the area that I really know nothing about. When we raised our kids, they would listen pretty much when they're little kids and behave, sit quietly, do what we told them, those kind of things. I got grandkids now, and the grandkids, it seems like they don't listen, and I'm wondering what role the parenting style they got at home affect. Like if you go to school, if at home you were dealt with and taught a certain way, then you go to school and the teacher doesn't use that style, you may not even respond to what they say. You see what I'm saying?
Oh, I do.
When they come to our house, we have to sort of actually program them to learn to respond to us the way we want the house rules, the way we want to be responded to, because they're not used to that kind of structure and that kind of stuff. That makes sense?
Oh, it makes perfect sense. And I think what Todd talked about earlier is, when we're going through this, we've got this broke down into our little compartment box. But in real life, this doesn't happen in a vacuum. So when we have kids who appear to not be listening or responsive to what we're telling them, we can't say with 100% it's this or this or this. In all likelihood, it's this, all coming into play at one time.
I'm sorry, just, I think the other thing is that I think that this whole issue of auditory processing delay and attention deficit. I think there are a lot of our kiddos that are actually experiencing auditory processing are being labeled as ADD or ADHD.
ADHD, ADD.
So I think this is something that is, and it's not new, obviously, but you're right about reactionary. It's we've got a long way to go on that regarding.
I have something to say. And it's because my kids, well, they were tested to see by the time they really get some action, it's way too late. But, they brought me to school and said, the kids, they reason pretty well, but, they can't grasp all this, and they're very intelligent people and all that kind of stuff. But, now when you say the advocacy, it's like it has to be something put in place. The question that he posed is that something has to be put in place like a lot sooner, because I'm trying to get with this advocacy thing where they have determined that by third grade people are going to go to prison. And so, you got to get some other stuff, because, kids are kids, and they don't hear well, and they don't listen, because they're kids. And so how do you determine such things at such an early age?
I think that all of us agree. I remember sitting at my grandparents' house, and my grandparents going, "This is a different world than when we grew up." And me thinking, what's the big deal? And then we listen to your parents. And now that, I'm 56, and I'm looking at having raised children, now as a 36-year-old with a 5-year-old, just in that span of time, this is a different world. So when we talk about interventions for kids and these determining factors, most of our kids, I'm not going to say 100%, but most of our kids who are coming into school systems and coming into relationships and other areas are balancing way more stimulation than our grandparents ever did. And that comes into play with our ADHD and our ADD, because our expectation of them to balance all of this stuff emotionally and what's happening in the world, as well as their home and with the education system and what we're wanting for them, and then be able to manage that, it's almost like we're expecting them to act like little adults.
Yeah.
And they're not little adults. They're kids, and their prefrontal cortexes have not developed to the point of being able to process everything on the levels that we would expect them to, and then we get behaviors that come with that. And then we try to explain it, well, what are this behavior, and so we form all these studies and everything, so.
Yeah, and one thought I had too regarding what,
Stan.
Stan. Is there?
You got the right name.
Angie, but is that there's a difference between selective listening or attention deficit and auditory processing.
Right.
And I think being educated on understanding the difference between the two. And my understanding with auditory processing is that ability to take in information, process, and do something with it, versus just shutting down and not listening to something.
Right.
So as far as like you're talking about your grandchildren, I think because of our society and the technology moving so quickly and wanting immediate information, is what I found is clarification and doing things in sequential steps. But when you're giving direction, that sounds so simplistic, but it works.
The cingulate cortex is involved in pain and visceral responses, receives input from the thalamus. So if our thalamus down here in our relay center, we're going to read about that, has been damaged, then it's going to send not appropriate reactions and responses to cingulate cortex, which is also involved with our emotions and the process of learning. The corpus callosum is that midline that connects the right and left sides of the brain. Why this is important is because both sides of the brain have very specific responsibilities. And the information that we take in, whatever kind of information, is going back and forth between the two sides as it processes. So if this corpus callosum is damaged, that means that the right and left sides of the brain are not speaking together. Okay? And they're not working and functioning the way that they need to.
Yeah, and I just read recently that marijuana, for instance, affects the corpus callosum, and in some ways makes the right and left brain not so separate. And so that really made me think about some things.
What's wrong with
All of us.
Yeah.
Our thalamus is the relay center and help regulate sleep and wake cycles, receives signals for vision, hearing, taste, and other body parts, but not smelling, because our smeller has the olfactory sense in the brain that handles all of this. With our kiddos who have been exposed to their trauma and substances and alcohol, sleep and wake cycles are very common problem.
Yeah.
Getting to sleep, staying asleep is very hard for these kiddos. And it's just something that we'll talk later on maybe about dealing with the interventions, but it's just something to be aware of, that this is a common problem with these kiddos. Okay. Your amygdala. It enables certain emotions and essential in perceiving emotions in others. So in this area of the brain, with our kiddos who have had this damage, it tends to be enlarged. It tends to be overactive. It tends to, number one, we're not always perceiving the correct emotion that somebody's giving to us, and we're over-responding as a reaction to. So this becomes critical when we're trying to build a relationship with a child toward recovery. If they can't accurately evaluate what's really going on, and they can't regulate their response to that, we've got all kinds of issues that come out of this. And we see a lot of meltdowns because these kiddos can't do that. They can't regulate those reactions. Everything is a big freaking deal.
Yeah.
From not being able to have their favorite pencil to if you would have slammed their toe in the car.
Yeah.
It's get the same response. And we as adults look at that and go, what's the big deal? Get another pencil. Ah! You know, because they're wanting their pencil. That's important to them, you know. But for us, it's not that big a deal. Okay, the cerebellum receives information from sensory systems, spinal cord, and other parts of the brain, and regulates motor movements. So just to stop here for a second, when we have our auditory processing, it's not always hand in hand, but commonly is. When we have a kiddo who has auto processing, they have trouble getting the right message, and then they have to plan what they're going to do with that message. So a lot of times these go hand in hand. We're going to have an auditory processing disorder and a motor planning one. So you can see with the extra time required with this, and a normal, and I'm glad you're here because you could represent the school system, and I'm certainly not picking on you, but we see a lot of issues that come in the school system because it's made to go. And so we have kids who can't get the right message, to get a broken message, and then once they get a message, they don't know what to do with it, and by then the teacher's moved on and they're lost. Okay. The cerebellum coordinates voluntary movements such as posture, balance, coordination, speech, and results in smooth and balanced muscular activity. So we have a little girl that would be just sitting on the floor playing, and she'd just stand up and fall over. You know, they were doing kinds of balance tests with her. She has an issue determining where she's at in space. how close things are underestimating. She is consistently taking off, heading someplace, and running into things, you know, and it has to do with her balance and with her issue. It has to do with that. But we address that with, you know, you can do that with physical therapy and OT, and there's things that you can kind of put in place, but this is pretty common for those. Parietal lobe can be divided into two functional areas. One involves sensation and perception, and the other is concentrating with integrating sensory input, primarily the visual system. And the first function integrates sensory information to form a single perception. So here's what that can look like. Kids, you'll have a child who, if I walked up and one of my twins and touch him, I'm putting very little pressure. He's like, ah. And you're like, what? I'm just touching you. To him, that's not just touching him. His body is sending him a signal that there's being more pressure put on him than he's comfortable with. And he responds that way. The flip is true. You've seen those kiddos that need that pressure on them to realize and feel that they're being touched or that something is happening. So we have the extremes on either end of that come into play with our kiddos. The septum is associated with pleasure and reproductive. It's a thin membrane separating the right and left sides of the brain. And hippocampus regulates emotions. It's associated with memory, especially long term, and spatial navigation. So that's also common with our kiddos that they do have memory issues. And what that looks like for us is, I just told you, or we did this yesterday, or you learned this before. And we think they're just trying to get out of being responsible for what we've told them. But in their mind, it's gone.
So now, what causes that?
Exposure and trauma.
Because there's a whole lot of kids and adults, I run into that. They don't remember what was said yesterday. We do training, we have a 5-day training, and people won't remember stuff from the first day, and, you know. So I experience this all the time, people not remembering.
And some, I think, lots of things, again, not being in a vacuum, come into play here, but we know that even for those of us who have not been tagged with memory issues, when we're under stress, try and remember something. Like you know it, you can see it, but to be able to say it or name it, now you decrease your stress levels, you take a breath, and the next day or a little bit later, you're like, oh yeah, and it comes back to you. But stress will affect your memory, and stress is a lot less than trauma, but then when you get trauma, it's going to impact the memory even more. Some of that is self-protection. We do have the ability with trauma that actually blocks things out because we're just not able to handle it, to be able to deal with it. And then other times it's just a side effect from the trauma. For my kiddos, their brains were changed due to exposure, and they are incapable of being able to hold on to those memory issues things. So they're not only not, when they do learn something, when they go to file it in their brain, they're not filing it in a logical location. So when they go back to get it, it doesn't make sense because they don't remember where they put it. It's not where it would make sense to find it if they can remember where they put it to start with, and so it's just gone.
I look at that as if there's an interference, like stress it's interfering with my ability to remember. Kind of what you're saying.
So how can you differentiate between if it's age appropriate or if it is in fact the trauma that's causing these issues?
And that's in the full context of what's going on.
Yeah.
That's with full evaluation. That's looking at, is there a physical reason? Is there a medical issue that's going on that's causing that? Is there been an emotional thing, a trauma thing that's going on? Has there been exposure? Or is this just something that they're just a little behind. And all kids aren't going to develop exactly.
Yeah.
We have very typical children that will give symptoms from time to time that don't have long-term issues. So it's a whole well-rounded
Yeah.
evaluation.
So my little girl, she's 3, and so we're having that struggle of, she's in behavioral therapy, but I think I'm ADHD, and my mom thinks I'm ADHD, and she never got me treated or diagnosed as a child, and so I still struggle with it as an adult, and I think her dad has it, and so my daughter, it's hard to tell, she's 3, so I'm like, okay, is this typical 3-year-old behavior, or is this ADHD, is this caused from the traumas that she's experienced? So, like, the therapist that she's working with, she thinks some of it might be trauma, she thinks some of it might be ADHD, and she thinks some of it might be age appropriate, and she's like, well, you need to get a pediatrician. Pediatrician doesn't want to do anything until she's 4 and in school, so I'm like, I'm trying to get this addressed early
I
so
know
that
you
she can
are.
like get through life, but it's super difficult.
With kids who have true chemical imbalance, like ADHD, true chemicals, not induced from trauma or a symptom of something else. When we give them stimulants, which to me, when I first got into this, seemed to be backwards. But when we give them stimulants, it actually helps them calm them down. So my pediatrician suggested to me, he was an older guy, he's long retired, but he said, well, just give him some Mountain Dew, that'll be a good test. I was like, are you smoking crack? I am not going to give this child who's already Mountain Dew. And he said, because if it's true chemical, once they get that Mountain Dew, they're going to calm down. If you give them Mountain Dew and it has the opposite effect or no effect, you know it's not chemical. You know it's a symptom of.
Yeah.
So I explained that to my husband who thought I'd smoked crack. And then when he wasn't around, gave the child Mountain Dew. And saw a change in his behavior. So for him at that point. So those are things that you could try on your own if you're trying to tease out what you think it is. That's not 100% accurate.
Yeah.
And there's no scientific study for it. But that'd be something that you might try to see if you see that a decrease in their hyperactivity and ability to concentrate.
One thing, this is off topic, one thing that I noticed with her is that if she eats sugar, you can see her pupils dilate. And I'm like, this is crazy. it's like the craziest thing ever. I'm like, it's like literally sugar is a drug for her. It's like a literal drug.
We were talking earlier, his son and my daughter have military experience, and what you're saying. When Tara went into the military and went into boot camp, the very first thing they did was strip them of everything. You couldn't have candy, couldn't have chocolate, couldn't have coffee,
Yeah.
couldn't have pop. Anything that had caffeine or sugar in it, they're stripping them down. Why? Because they needed to get back to being healthy and baseline so that they could learn. So if you see your child has this type of sensitivity to sugar, that's probably a pretty good indication that you want to monitor how much sugar they get. And that's not just candy. I mean, because this, you know.
It's in bread.
It's exactly. That's why I was going. The most dangerous sugar our kids get that we think they're not getting is that fructose that's in everything.
Yeah, my mom is a diabetic, so we try to adhere to a diabetic-friendly diet, but, you know, she's kids. Sometimes it's not that easy.
And when I'm sorry again, I feel guilty. I'm still right next to her. But it's like when you're trying to do this at home, and then you send your kids to school. One of the things that I have found with my kiddos is my teachers giving them candy.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you passed this, oh, you hit this milestone, here's this treat, here's this treat, here's this treat. And you're like going, someday I'm going to give my kid a bag of M&Ms and a Mountain Dew and send him to school and see what you like about that, you know. But it is that hidden stuff, and since you're aware of that you're well ahead.